Today, all eyes will be on President Muhammad Buhari to assent to the National Assembly transmitted 2022 budget. The clerk to the National Assembly, Amos Ojo, forwarded a letter to the President alongside a letter dated the 24th December entitled Appropriation Bill 2022. The transmission comes a week after the Senate and the House of Representatives passed the budget. However, before passing the budget, lawmakers had increased the total expenditure from 16.3 trillion to 17.1 trillion, showing an increase of over 700 billion. Also, the lawmakers increased the oil benchmark price from $57 per barrel to $62 per barrel to reflect current market values of the oil barrel in the international market, while Nigeria's daily oil production rate was pegged at $1.86 million per barrel. 1.86 million barrels. In the budget, statutory transfer was put forward 869.6 billion and debt service at 3.88 trillion, recurrent expenditure and non-debt expenditure at 6.9 trillion, and capital expenditure at 5.46 trillion. So joining us now for an in-depth analysis of the transmitted 2022 budget, waiting for assent, is Professor Ndubisi Nwokoma, Professor of Financial Economics and Director of Center for Economic Policy, Analysis and Research at the University of Lagos, Akoka. Prof, it's a pleasure having you, and Happy New Year in advance. Let's go through this budget. At first, let's look at...
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Let's look at the benchmarks. From $57 per barrel, it's been increased to $62 per barrel benchmark. Is that realistic in the first place?
If you take a look at the global oil price, particularly for our burning light, Brent crude, it's about $78 per barrel presently. And I guess the lawmakers were trying to be optimistic that the thing will not come below. So by moving it to 62, they are assuming that this trajectory of about 78, 79 and could be sustained. So I think it's a gamble, if I put it that way, because the oil market we know is very volatile. It's a very volatile market, and some developments, particularly if Omicron, the Omicron variant of COVID-19 becomes adverse and has global implications, definitely that will affect the global economy as well as the global oil market. So I would say it's a gamble because the oncoming year is a little bit not very clear, particularly with Omicron, in the front burner across the economy. So it's a gamble. That's my opinion about the change in the benchmark price for oil.
So I wanted to talk to you about the inevitable topic of the budget deficit, which is 6.2 trillion naira. We have our total revenue at 10.13 trillion naira and total expenditure at 16.39 trillion naira and the deficit 6.26 trillion naira. Your comments on that, sir?
Yeah, the government in the past few years has actually been gambling with these figures, in my opinion, because none of them actually has been able to materialize in the kind of desired end that they have. For example, you have a budget proposal of about 16.3 trillion, and which has been jacked up to about 17.12. And the plan from the government document is it's a 25% increase because of the pandemic and the effects. And then what government have been doing over the period is to borrow to support this increase in expenditure when the revenue is not really growing. No wonder the Minister of Finance had always been saying that our problem is revenue. But, they don't look at the other side of the expenditure side of this transaction, because for any budget, you have the revenue side, you also have the side of the expenditure. So when you talk about having the budget increase from 16.39 trillion to 17.12, and then you are borrowing so much, you have the high level of deficit, which is about very, very high. And then you have about, to service the debt, you have 3.8 trillion as for your debt service. And then you have a high level of deficit because you have 10.1 trillion as the revenue that you're getting from oil, from non-oil tax revenue and so on. And you are spending 17 points. So high level of deficit. And each year, and how do we finance the deficit? Basically, they're going to borrow about 5.01 trillion. And other project-tied loans, which also will come in, has been able to get some proceeds from privatization of some government assets. So definitely, government has been running a highly leveraged budget over the past 5 years. It's highly leveraged, and we have increasing level of deficit. It's about 6%. And then, if you take a look, if you now go deeper, the amount of money you are going to generate from oil revenue is about 3.16 trillion. And then you have about 3.8 to service your debt. So which means that all the money we expect to earn from oil will not even be enough for debt service. 3.8 trillion as debt service provision. And then you have 3.16 as all the revenue you generate from oil. So you have to dip your hands into the non-oil tax revenue to be able to service the debt of yesterday. And then you are not borrowing another 5.01 to sustain the current budget. So clearly speaking, it is a highly leveraged budget. And it's like putting yourself on a keg of gunpowder. Going further down, you are borrowing about 5 trillion, and then you have about 5.4 trillion as your provision for capital expenditure. So even all the money you borrow cannot even finance your capital expenditure. Clearly speaking, it's highly leveraged, and the government has to really do the yeoman's job to be sure that we don't come at the end of the year and begin to tell stories. If you want to go a little bit further, with all this high leverage, we are talking about 4.2% growth in GDP. I don't know how that is going to come about. And for the past few years, have we been able to achieve any of the growth projections? Because if you keep on making growth projections and you don't attain them, but each year you keep on, upping the game. So it's a highly leveraged budget. It is good. It is being passed on time, very good. But I think we need to take a look at, I don't know whether government does that, as previous budgets, before you now begin to make some projections that most likely will end up being unattainable.
A lot of people are saying we can make 10 trillion by spending 17 trillion. What happens to cutting your coat according to your size? According to your cloth, I should say. Well, what happens to cutting your coat according to your cloth when you look at it? Because most of the monies earmarked for capital projects are being lost to corruption. And I'll make the point about a revelation recently by the Accountant General of the Federation saying about 4.2 trillion can't be accounted for by some MDAs. So isn't the first step just cutting our coat according to our cloth?
Yes. I think what government has been doing, in my opinion, is actually trying to cut our cloth according to our size. I think they need to change that strategy. Rightly, said, we need to cut our coat according to our cloth. And I think that has been the problem really over time. For example, when you are talking about the size of your budget, what government is not doing is not trying to talk about the issue of the cost of governance. The cost of governance, it has been an area we have not been able to address over time. We've been looking at the revenue side. We've not been looking at the expenditure side and the leakages. And then the volume. Because there are two issues. One is the leakages via corruption, and then the other one is the extravagance. The countries we are borrowing from, for bilateral loans, how are the leaders living? How are the leaders spending money? How are they operating for those that we are borrowing from? You look at the quantum of money we have for security votes. Talk about the presidency. talk about the National Assembly. Well, the executive primarily, the volume, the size of the cost of governance, to me, is very, very high. So corruption, yes, it's an area that we need to take a look at, because particularly through capital votes, you discover that there are leakages. And can we actually point at critical infrastructure, apart from the railways, which actually has not really gone as far as would have expected, and a few other projects? Are we investing in projects that actually can be self-financed, that can help us pay back those debts? Are we looking at the issues of debt service payment to revenue, which is which is gone off track, currently? So definitely, what government needs to do is to address the issue of cost of governance. That will actually answer your question about cutting our coat according to our cloth. The cloth we have, the revenue level we have, cannot support the type of expenditure we are proposing. And I think government needs to take a look at cutting, taking a look at the MDAs. How are they operating? The core bureaucracy of government, how are they operating? Are there areas that you can cut the cost? So that even with our level of revenue, we can still achieve a lot more. But by trying to up the game from 16.39 to 17.12, and then we're not talking about increasing taxes. The minister has already talked about by next year, they want to increase taxes, stamp duties, digital economy, Facebook, they want to tax them. All we are focusing on is revenue. We need to get money from tenancy, from stamp duties, from VAT, from Facebook, and so on. But we should take a look at the side of expenditure. Just like you mentioned, the issue of corruption, the issue of being able to cut down on the cost of governance. That will help the economy a lot. If we don't do that, and we keep on spending at this rate, I think we may have a problem with this budget, particularly when they're thinking of having a fuel subsidy removed and all that, which I doubt whether that can really happen without collapsing the economy. That's just my opinion on this.
Can you expand on that, Prof? Because it does appear that it is going to happen in the middle of next year, that fuel subsidy will be removed. You said it will collapse the economy?
Yes, because of the multiplier effect of that through transportation. It's because when goods and services must have to move in the economy, and we know from experience what has happened in the economy. When you increase, you remove fuel subsidy, it has effects. The informal sector actually will be seriously affected, and people will begin to transfer, and that will affect inflation. Even though I have my little worry whether government will have that boldness to do that this year because of next year's election. The ruling party may be scared. That's just my feeling. Because that is like a suicide mission for them to reduce fuel subsidy when you have a few months to election. Because if you remove fuel subsidy at a go, and then it has a high level of effect on inflation, and prices begin to rise, and incomes are not increasing. People's incomes are not increasing. Not just real income, disposable income, because people's taxes are being increased. You want to increase, we have to tax people more this year or in the next year. And you also, with inflation, which will come through for subsidy, you are talking about the real income. And then you think that can be sustainable, even though some people have said it's not highly inflationary. I think there's no point for us to gamble and go through that part. I have my doubt whether government will not have a rethink, or they will do it in phases. If they do it as they are planned in Q2, and then it affects prices and everything will increase, particularly via transportation, then there's going to be some serious problem with the economy. So I think, in my opinion, I want to advise government to be very careful in being able to remove this subsidy. If they want to do that, they need to do it properly and in phases, maybe 2 or 3 phases over the period, so that they can manage the effects. As you have a little increase, you manage the consequences, and then you make sure the proceeds are deployed to key sectors. And people can now see that there's value in what you are doing, and then they can support you in the next phase and the next phase. If you don't do that, there could be some crisis for the Nigerian economy.
I want to talk about recurrent expenditure. It's always been a big problem. How can we reduce recurrent expenditure? And the argument is it's a very sad argument, because when you look at the population of the civil service compared to the entire workforce, it is minuscule. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not sure we have up to 20 million civil servants working at a going government in this country. To take that portion of our national commonwealth, how can we reduce that recurrent expenditure problem?
Well, in my opinion, I think is to take a look at the bureaucracy of government. There are some kind of, in my opinion, there are duplications in government services. We have the Orosayan report, where you need to match certain MDAs, where there are so much duplications, and the cost of governance that's also an area in which we can work on the cost of governance. Government definitely must take a look at, particularly for the executive, for political office holders, for those who are holding political office. That is actually where we have this cost of governance actually, skyrocketing, and then that affects our recurrent expenditure. Because if you take a look at the core bureaucracy and the ordinary person, I don't think it's significant, but one, duplication of government services. Government should take a look at that report by Orosoye and try to see how you can do some kind of mergers across the board. And then once that is done, it will definitely save some money, and then cut down on recurrent expenditure. And and then political office holders, it's a core area in which government can actually cut down on the recurrent spending. But for the ordinary person who is a civil servant on level 8, level 9, definitely you have to pay him. You have to pay, attend to ASU, of which I'm a member. ASU is actually making some cogent, some key points on how you can support the system so that to enhance the quality of education in Nigeria. There are basic, important, recurrent spendings that government should not toy with. But political office holders and then duplications in services of government, I think those areas can be addressed, and that will help us to cut down on that particular proposal or that budget item.
Well, thank you, sir. Can you put the statutory transfers into context? Because the figure seems massive, 736 billion naira, and also billions devoted to former presidents and heads of states, retired, perm sex, and heads of service. It does tend to raise an eyebrow, considering what you've said earlier about profligacy in our spending. And another question I have is the 2.4 trillion naira devoted to defense, which obviously we can justify, seeing the kind of security crisis that we're facing as a country. But I want to get your thoughts on the controversial argument that was advanced in America, defund the police. Controversial there, and I'm sure controversial here, if it was applied here. That argument in America is that the money, the funding devoted to police should be reduced, and some of that channeled into programs that will stop the crimes that are, skyrocketing in the first case. And the same could be applied here. Instead of dedicating 2.4 trillion naira to security, what about creating employment opportunities and education opportunities to reduce the amount of, people that fall into terrorism, criminality, and all kinds of social evils?
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. 2 questions. I will take the first one. The statutory transfers, which basically covers the judiciary, like the National Assembly, which is about 139 billion, which in my opinion is reasonable. You have the judiciary, you have INEC, you have a Human Rights Commission, and so on. So all those ones are basically they are statutory, like the name suggests. And I think it's just to maintain different arms of government. That takes care of the other 2 arms of government. The judiciary and the legislature, and of course the referee, the INEC, and so on. So in my opinion, if you take a look at the breakdown of those transfers, I think unless they may be justified from that perspective, unless we now go deeper into the content and they see whether there are duplications, which we assume the National Assembly has done by being able to go much deeper into that. But statutorily, we should provide for the legislature, the judiciary, and INEC, and so on. Now, on the issue of defense, I have a problem with government provisions in the past few years on security. I have a very big problem because it looks like government is just throwing money at this problem. You don't throw money at a problem. I don't think government is fully committed, this is my opinion, on this issue of fighting insecurity or even addressing the issue of insecurity. I don't think government has been very sincere. It's not about throwing money. We use about $1 billion excess crude accounts on security. Nothing has happened. We bought jets from America. No difference. You can hardly travel across the highways in Nigeria without praying all the while. If you see any roadblock, you keep on praying. Either you pray to whatever faith you belong. So I think the issue of security has not really improved. We have been throwing money at this problem. Government needs to show more commitment than throwing money. I don't think this money, the problem is lack of money for security. I think government, many people even suspect government as if government is supporting insecurity for whatever reason, whatever agenda. Because across the country, in the past 5 years, we have insecurity localized to the northeast, largely, and sometimes in Abuja. But now it's all over the country, and yet we spent much more money than we spent in the past. We've been able to exhaust so many budgets. The crude account has been exhausted. We've spent money every year. We pump in money for security, but it's not getting better. You don't solve that problem by throwing money at it. Why are the unknown gunmen all over the place? Don't you have a police force? Don't you have the military? In some part of the country, we hear of unknown gunmen. In the southeast, are they beyond the police system and the architecture? We have the military, who at times address or capture young men who are just passing by, and that has not solved the problem. I think the issue about throwing money at it is just like trying to being simplistic. Government should do much more than voting 2.4 billion for defense. Are we fighting a war? Boko Haram has been expanding. There are some parts of the country where they are forcing their flags even now as we speak, and people have to pay taxes or pay some dues before they are allowed to go and trade in the market. And yet we are spending all this money on security. So I think yes, we should spend money, but I think it goes more than spending money. Government should be seen as committed to fighting this problem, to address the problem, and then to make sure that people can actually travel. Many people now who have the means travel by air. You hardly can think of somebody traveling to Abuja from Lagos by road. You can get there safely, but you have your heart beating all through. Or travel to the east by road. Or you talk about kidnappings. It has increased, and yet we are spending much more money. So I think government should go beyond spending money on security. Government should show more commitment, and let us begin to believe in them that they actually have to fight security, and not that they are the ones causing it. That, in my opinion, should be the way to address the issue of security in Nigeria. And that has affected our economy seriously, like has been discussed before. Because when people cannot feel free to travel for business transactions, or go buying and selling, or travel for leisure, tourism, you are not sure you are traveling. It has brought down the GDP of this country. It has brought down our GDP growth rate. It has brought down so many indicators that will affect the economy to achieve what we are planning. There's need for more commitment by government in addressing the problem, and not just by voting in more money to fight insecurity.
Okay, I'd like to talk to you about this humanitarian ministry. We've voted money over the years. Now we'll be voting another 880 billion. But there's nothing to show for it. There's poverty everywhere. What's happening? Is this money justified?
I share your concerns 100%. I share this concern because it looks like that's a means of sharing money to people we want to share money to. I don't see how that has value significant to the Nigerian economy. Yes, we should have social safety nets. It's allowed. It's permitted even in capitalist economies. Even in America, you have social safety nets. But this humanitarian ministry in which you have such humongous amount of money being distributed, what happened last year during the pandemic, and how money were being distributed, you have a stash of cash all over, and then people are being given out money. We don't know how much money was given out. We don't know who got what. And we don't know which states actually were covered. And the money is that how we can grow the Nigerian economy? Why can't those monies be plowed in to support manufacturing, support agriculture? Even those in agriculture cannot really go out and farm. When people need to earn income, people need to work and earn income than being able to be given. If you give somebody 5,000 naira a month, how long would that take him? And then he wait for the next month, in a month, next month. Sharing money alone is not going to solve the problem. There should be a smaller portion for the very vulnerable in the society. Those are highly vulnerable. And then they can actually be assisted. But making it a core pillar of government policy, in my opinion, is something that can be faulted. We need to reduce the size of that budget for that ministry significantly, and then find ways of applying the money. Why do we keep on borrowing? The level of debt for Nigeria is about 40 trillion. We are spending about 80% of our money on debt service, of the revenue we generate on debt, and then we are talking of such money being distributed to people. We can't even know whether they have a reliable database. So I think that is an area of leakage. These are part of the areas of cutting the cost of governance. This money is being frittered away, and I think we need to address that. I don't think it's necessary. What of the trader money we spent out? The trader money and all the monies for the less vulnerable, the vulnerable in the society, how have they been accounted for? How have they helped the economy? I think these are areas that we need to look at. I think that is an area we should cut down in the budget, the size of that particular ministry, in my opinion.
Well, I'd just like your take, just as we run out of time, it appears. We haven't heard your take on the allocations for infrastructure, health, and education.
It is good for government to spend on infrastructure. And I think that basically is what will open up the economy. And I must commend government for their focus, even if it's a lip service, on developing the railway system. And at least people can travel from Lagos to Ibadan. I've gone through that road once, and I think I find it quite desirable and pleasurable too. But we need to do much more than that. So it's a good thing that government is spending money on infrastructure, and I think it's something that we should commend them for. But government spending about 5.46 trillion on capital expenditure, we need to ask for a rundown of what happened last year, the ones who spent, because the issue is being able to trace down to projects. And I think that's an area that they should be more focused on this time around. They should be project tied. And we can have so many roads in the country that are not motorable. They're not motorable. And then when people hear of such a humongous amount spent on capital expenditure, people now begin to ask, where are the projects? In my opinion, the amount of money voted in the past 5-6 years, compared to what you can see on ground, they are not in any way commensurate. We spend so much money, and for the past few years, we've been spending about 30% of our budget on the capital expenditure, which is a good thing. But we need to be able to identify clearly where are the projects. Like I can see the Lagos-Ibadan Railway. We need to see the one from Port Harcourt to Enugu. We need to see the one from Ibadan to Ilorin and to Abuja. We need to see them. And some of the ones that are on ground already. We are done by the past government. Of course, we have a continuum in governance. The amounts voted is appropriate, but we need to see the projects, and that will help Nigerians to better appreciate what is being done by the current administration. That amount is justifiable, is justified. I think it should be encouraged, but we cannot see all the projects. We cannot see them to be able to flow along with their thinking. And the education is an area that government needs to actually spend more time on and spend more money for the coming year. We have the demands by the academic staff union of universities and also the other unions in the university system. Not only that, secondary and primary education should also be an area that government should be able to focus on. Government needs to make sure we avert all these strikes in the various sectors, even the health sector. The government has appealed to young doctors not to go on strike. But when we are not spending much money in health, when the political office holders are actually going abroad to attend to their health needs, when you're not putting enough money, when you don't make a law that any person who is a political office holder should have his children educated here in Nigeria or should stay in Nigeria for his health matters, or should go to our local hospitals, or we'll be able to develop money to a major world-class hospital where the presidency and the president himself can actually attend and can actually than going to London. They are all over. Many of the people that are in who hold high office in Nigeria, they all go abroad for their medical needs. So government needs to pump in more money in education, pump in more money in health, pump in more money for infrastructure. Those are key areas. And then those humanitarian areas, humanitarian ministry, where money is being frittered away, being shared out. So there's the need for some realignment of the budget towards education, towards health, towards infrastructure. I think if we do that, then we are prepared. We are trying to prepare the ground for economic growth, particularly if we add to it fighting insecurity.
Right. Budget performance in less than 2 minutes. What's your take on this? We've always fall short on budget performance.
Yes. The way it is currently, I do not have that hope that this year will be different. We cannot be talking about 4.2% GDP growth rate. I don't think it's realistic. The IMF said 2.7%. I think that also is not realistic. If you take a look at our past antecedents, the quarter-to-quarter growth in GDP, it has been dismal. Apart from the last 2 quarters, quarter 2 of this year and quarter 3, which was 5% and about 4%. The other ones have been negative and quite not realistic. So I don't think the performance of this year's budget, the way it is currently structured, will be something that will be desirable. They need to do some re-engineering of the figures so that money can be plowed to the appropriate sectors. And then they need to be careful how they handle this issue of a fuel subsidy. If it is not properly handled, the performance will be very, very, very dismal.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time, Professor. Have a happy new year.